Good. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. It's the first ATypI that I come to. This is a project that started a few years ago in Nancy, in France, at the ANRT. So much of what I'm going to discuss has been kind of brewing inside my head for a few years. I've also discussed some of the issues in a couple of conferences before. So if you've been to those, you might find some familiar things about it. Can I use this for changing the slides?
That should work.
Yeah, no, not working. It's okay, I can use the computer as well. Yeah, there you go, now it works. Thanks. So I hope this talk is going to be about the way we define the boundaries in our field. It is mainly going to be about typeface design, but even if you're a graphic designer or interested in typography in more general terms, I hope I can kind of show you ideas that you can extrapolate to your area of interest. The main topic of the talk is going to be consistency as one of the defining features in typeface design. I'm very interested in that notion. I will develop why later, and I will have mainly like 4 parts in the talk. So first I'll tell you why I'm interested in consistency. Then I'm gonna explain a little bit of why consistency is like a noble ideal, but then it kind of clashes with reality, and I feel some problems come from that. Then I'm gonna talk about the way we usually teach typeface design to people. And finally, the conclusion is going to be hopefully like a call for students and teachers to start experimenting in a way I will talk to you about. So first of all, why consistency? Why am I interested in it? Well, the first thing is that it's basically like a very key assumption about typeface design. Ever since people started discussing typeface design and ways of making typefaces, they have been talking about consistency as a key element in order to be able to achieve like a good result in a typeface. So that's the main reason why I'm interested in it, because it is like one of the places you go to when you're talking about typeface design. Consistency, it's also something that helps you meeting the conventions that we've been building in our practice during centuries. So again, if you go back and read and see what people have been talking about, you will find them looking for ways to explain to people what consistency is and how they should achieve it in their work. Another thing about consistency in typeface design is that it really helps you achieving good results. You know, it's like, let's say, well, you'll probably infer from my talk, but it's like a safe way to make something that looks competent. It really works. Yeah, you can see it in a bunch of examples. And then it also is like a concept that runs through the whole practice. So whenever you design a typeface, or at least especially when you're learning, you try to apply consistency in all sorts of levels, starting from the very small details and going up to the more broad features of your typeface. And then maybe as time goes by and maybe you start getting a bit more confident, then you might play with this a little bit. But usually you want to try to be consistent in all sorts of levels when you design a typeface. There's also some other ideas about consistency that make it interesting for me. It really conforms with many ideals of our society in a way. So consistency, it's very modern. It really fits with many of our ideas, the ones that we're brought up with. I really like this picture because when I see this ship, that basically is typeface design in a way. You know, you have all these sorts of shapes that you need to fit together, and then you kind of need to find the most effective way to put them all together, you know? That's really like a key idea in our society. There's also something I find interesting about having such a strong concept in our practice, and that is it is like an objective in itself, and in that way it's very easy to demonstrate it, it's very easy to teach it, which is good in some cases. But the fact that it's so easy to demonstrate, then it sort of helps reinforcing this idea that runs through many design disciplines about individual skill, individual achievement, and having this kind of genius that can achieve this stuff and put this together for the rest of us to admire. So when we have so how do we get to such a concept, and what do I feel happens when you find it in the real world practice? I feel of course there's been the need. Typography and typeface design has been all about it, about finding ways of systematizing what we do, starting from writing and going all the way to all the possible ways that we've used to reproduce letters and to make letters. It's been always about becoming more and more systematic. The means as well have been very systematic for a long time, so all the machines that we're used to, all the processes that we've used, they require a degree of systematization. Yeah, of course, even today, our means are really encourage being systematic and being consistent. So that is one need that has been, I feel, ever present since the introduction of typeface design. But I feel that's been shifting into a more of a commercial thing. So now it's like the market is the one that is asking us to meet those expectations, not necessarily the software, not necessarily the systems that we use, but more or less the market. That's all right, that's not necessarily something bad. You can find it in most fields that you can think about. You can go to architecture and you find that there's like a very commercial kind of pressure going on from in every level of practice. You can do that. Of course, you can find it in the arts, and I'm going to mention the arts because there is something interesting about it, and it's that the same with design. It's like a practice-based field, and to me that also means there's this other pressure outside of the market, which is you as a designer, you want to put some of yourself into the work that you're doing. And so those would be the two kind of pressures or things that would influence what you do today. You'll have the market, then you'll have your own expectations of what you want to achieve or show with the work you're doing. And I feel that's problematic when you start trying to teach young students, because the fact that we in typeface design have this very strong concept of consistency for everything that we do, it means that we might be missing looking at some other interesting things in some other interesting places. I like this because it's about Irving Penn, the American photographer, and somewhere in a little essay he wrote in a book, he talks about many versions of perfect, referring to when he was making prints out of the photos he would take, and that he wouldn't necessarily be looking for one singular picture that he was trying to achieve, but he was happy to see what things would happen. And I feel when you have such a strong conviction of the stuff that you need to achieve, then you might be looking, or you might be avoiding maybe asking interesting questions about the discipline, in our case, typeface design. So I feel that typeface design may have defined a canon maybe too well and maybe too early, not for the, I mean, it's been done for centuries, but it's only being taught for maybe a few decades, and we're all really seem to be convinced that that's the one way to go. To me, the shame of that is that there's many things that are sort of left out of the canon and just seen as oddities. So when you may try to show your students what's a sans serif, of course you are probably not going to show them the weird early linotype typeface, but you're going to show them universe, and you're going to show them, I don't know, accidents, or any of the canonical, let's say, sans serif. Of course, they might see this and they might get excited about it. We might get excited about it. Again, it still remains as this rare thing that happened in a certain period, and similar things that may have happened in similar periods. So today we celebrate it, as well. So future fonts, you have this extremely talented designers doing, finding novel ways of expressing and finding novel ways of making typefaces. We find that very interesting, but that doesn't necessarily in the long run gets integrated into the common knowledge of our practice. I like postmodernism because it really made an effort to try to theorize what they were doing and to try to integrate itself, and even it's recent, it happened 20 years ago maybe, and it's already being forgotten in a way. You don't find that many people that are interested in it, except, again, as an odd thing that happened, sort of experimental, interesting, but not really as something to study and to learn necessarily learn from it. And so when that happened, when we're leaving all this stuff out, I feel that the uncertain and the uncomfortable is left to the least interesting places. So you would struggle, when I was studying, struggle with software, struggle with the small details, like, this little serif right here, this little node, a couple of points to the left, to the right. With the technical questions. And some innovation might come from that, but again, not necessarily the most interesting place for a student to be worried with. And then when you go out to practice, then it's the business, and it's this thing about like how much time you have, how much money can they pay, and then how much can you spend really working on the project that you're doing. Again, not the most interesting place to find innovation. I'll do this parenthesis, which is related to it, because I like looking at other areas, and music is one of them. And something very interesting happened in music in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, and is this Austrian composer who went to teach in the US. He's Arnold Schoenberg, and he sort of invented, or at least came up with this new way of composing music. So until him, most of Western music was tonal, and he came up with a way of composing atonal music. He had influences from music from the Far East and other cultures, and so that sort of gave him ideas of coming up with a completely different way, completely different canon for composing music, something that nobody else had done until then. Also, he was like a classical musician, so he had like a lot of pressure around him for meeting certain standards and meeting certain ideals of what the music that he composed should do. And impressively, in less than a century, or in about a century, his idea of atonality got integrated into jazz music and then into progressive rock, and from there it has been permeating a lot of music. So now if you go and look at one of these charts that they do every year about the music that is the best of the year or something like that, you have a good chance to find a few songs that have atonal things in it. And I think that's extremely interesting. So to conclude the talk, this, I wish, is a call for learning and embracing the uncomfortable, trying to find new ways of understanding the knowledge that we do. Why do I say controlled experiments? Because there's sometimes this funny notion that experiments shouldn't have too many rules. Sometimes I play video games, and I was playing Grand Theft Auto online, and there's this massive world, and it has no rules. So you can just, there's some things you can go and do. You can go and have races in cars and have some challenges. But if you're just hanging around in the world, there's no rules. So somebody is probably going to come and run at you with his car, or somebody is going to shoot you, or whatever, out of nowhere because of nothing, just because there's no rule. And that's no fun. So I think controlled experimentation would be the ideal way to go. I think it's very interesting, something that's been happening in literature for about 5 decades, and it was started by some French writers called Oulipo. They have been playing for those 5 decades with rules and ways to experiment with language and with grammar and with all the tools of the trade in order to find new ways to write stories and new ways to write poetry. And the whole idea behind Oulipo is not so much about being original or being different or anything. It's just to have a better understanding of what they're doing. They want to really get into a deeper knowledge of how language works, of how grammar works, of how people read. And I feel that really that should be the way to go for schools. Like neither the software or the tools, and even less the market, are the place to do this. It's very difficult. Like software tends to take you in a certain way. Of course, the market doesn't allow you to spend much time on what you're doing or experimenting. So they are not the place to try to redefine what we already know. And this takes me back to something that was said in Typolabs by Jerry Leonidas, because it leaves us waiting for this superhuman, waiting for this genius that is going to come and show us the new way, show us what can be done. And I feel that's sad because there's so much potential, so many people doing, potentially could do great stuff if only schools were kind of pushing them in the direction of kind of intelligent experimentation. Innovation, it's really difficult to achieve, I think, because when you are left with a case like ours, in which we have a very well-defined common knowledge, there might be a certain instance in which you are commissioned a typeface for a new technology, like we're having today with variable fonts, and then there's probably going to be some innovation going on there. You may have a very specific problem that you need to address. Again, somebody asks you to design a typeface for this one very special thing, and then also some innovation might be easy to achieve in that. You might get lucky and your typeface becomes like the cultural representation of the time, you know, like Futura did, or like maybe the types from Dido or Bodoni did in their moment, or something like that. That's basically luck that we're waiting for. And then ideally, when most of those things happen, or some of those happen, then your product sort of affects the wider context, and it becomes this culturally relevant product. So all of this is to say, like, really, I feel schools are the place, you know, the place for people to experiment, the place for people to try out these things, the place for people to look at where the field and the discipline may be going. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.